The House will be in order. The chair will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? With what can we come before you, O Lord, this day? How shall we honor you, O Lord, most exalted? Shall we come before you with the sacrifice of our time and energy as proof of our dedication to serve you and the people we have been set apart to represent? Will you be pleased with the multitude of our meetings and appointments, with the bounty of our hard-earned achievements? What should we lay before you to make up for our mistakes and missteps? How can we possibly atone for the transgressions of our souls? Take away all that blinds us from what you have already shown us is good and acceptable in your sight. Let us place before you the only sacrifice you require of us, to do what is fair and just in all facets of our lives, to be patient and compassionate, taking the initiative to show kindness even to those who are hard to be kind to humble ourselves, even though we demonstrate that our love we can demonstrate that our love for you far exceeds our own self-interests. In these offerings alone, may we achieve what is the good pleasure of your desire for our service to you and to this nation. In your merciful name we pray. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Please join me to salute our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
He asks consent to address the House for 1 minute and otherwise extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to report on the situation of California's water supply, which really is the nation's water supply, as so much of our food source comes from California. 90 to 99% of our specialty crops, tomatoes, pistachios, almonds, walnuts. So many of these crops come from California if we're allowed to grow them. Water supply is a core part of that. So we have a situation in Northern California where each year it's a challenge to refill our lakes. Lake Oroville holds 3.5 million acre feet, Lake Shasta 4.5, Trinity Lake 2.5 million, which is a total of about 10.5 million acre feet. A lot of water. We have the potential to build Sites Reservoir, another 1.5 million acre feet. We could raise Shasta Dam and gain another 600,000 acre feet, a total of 12.5 million acre feet. Yet, we aren't allowed to store that water. There's so much water now being devoted for other purposes that aren't for people, that are not for hydroelectric power. Indeed, they're tearing out hydroelectric dams in my district right now at a time when we want to go green with more CO2-free power and electrify everything. We have to do much better with corralling and saving our water supply for people's needs in California so it benefits the whole country. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize the hardworking school board members in my district in recognition of School Board Appreciation Month. I'm incredibly grateful for the extremely devoted school board members across Aldine ISD, Galena Park ISD, Channelview ISD, Sheldon ISD, Pasadena ISD, and Humble ISD. These folks were elected by their communities to do some of the most important work a public servant can do. They are fostering the next generation of leaders by ensuring that our public schools are places where students can learn, explore, dream, and thrive. I know that keeping our schools running smoothly comes with plenty of late nights and a lot of behind-the-scenes work. I know this firsthand because many of my family members have served or are serving on school boards. But for their work, our public schools continue to be the foundation of the great American dream. We must support our public schools. Thank you for their service, and we wish them Godspeed this year. Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Wish to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the ongoing efforts of the Wintergreen community to build an emergency exit road to keep their residents safe. The Wintergreen community is located within the Blue Ridge National Park in Nelson County, Virginia, and home to up to 10,000 residents at any given time. It's situated in a box canyon, but it only has one road that leads in or out. For 20 years, the community has tried to work with the Park Service to construct an emergency exit, but has been denied every time. The community is trying to fund and create a 400-foot emergency exit road to the Blue Ridge Parkway, which would be critical to saving lives in the event of a fire. The Park Service continues to insist they do not have the authority to approve this action. So to remedy the situation, I'm introducing the Blue Ridge Fire Safety Act to make it clear that the Park Service does have the authority to grant an emergency road construction permit. Madam Speaker, I hope that the common sense will prevail and prioritize the safety of this community, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to remember the life of Ofelia Valdez Yeager, a trailblazer for the Latino community in the Inland Empire. She was a champion for all students, both in the classroom as a teacher and in her capacity as the first Latina to serve on the Riverside Unified School Board of Trustees. As a founding member of LANET, commonly referred to as the Latino Network, she helped give a voice to the growing Latino population in Riverside. Ofelia enriched our community and helped mobilize efforts that created the Cesar Chavez Memorial and established the Cheech Marin Center for Chicano Art and Culture to downtown Riverside. I will miss her unwavering spirit and fierce advocacy dearly. My thoughts and prayers are with her family as they mourn the loss of a mother, wife, and grandmother. I yield back, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to recognize Mitchell Wright, a social studies teacher at Watauga High School in North Carolina's 5th District. Recently, I nominated Mitchell for the United States Capitol Historical Society Civic Education Workshop, a competitive program that selects only 16 educators from across the nation to participate. Last week, he was selected as part of this cohort and will travel to the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum in Fremont, Ohio, in the latter part of February. There, these 16 educators will develop new lesson plans and a variety of instructional materials relating to the Electoral College that they will be able to share with their students. Congratulations, Mitchell, on your selection to this program, and thank you to the Capitol Historical Society for your continued work in creating novel instructional workshops such as this. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, it's been 687 days since Putin invaded Ukraine, 379 days since we secured our last aid package for the Ukrainians, 97 days since Hamas launched its brutal terror attack on Israel and took numerous Israelis and Americans hostage. It's been 79 days since Mike Johnson became Speaker, 71 days since he made aid to Israel contingent on completely unrelated partisan IRS cuts, breaking not only 75 years of bipartisan precedent, but also the principle of the One Subject Act he sponsored back in 2017. Mr. Speaker, how many days will it be until Congress stands up for freedom and democracy once again? The answer ought to be today. Instead, we find ourselves mired in the chaos sown by a majority party that refuses to give us a clean vote. It must stop, or I fear democracy's days may be numbered. Let us act, and let us act now for the Ukrainians, for the Israelis, to oppose criminal invasions and terrorism. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to advise the House.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is now recognized.
I know that pains you to put this up, so I appreciate it. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize the University of Michigan football team for winning the national championship. It is great to be a Michigan Wolverine. Monday night, the Michigan football team completed their final test and stood atop as national champions, capping off a 15-0 season. Team 144 will be Big Ten champions, Rose Bowl champions, and now national champions. Despite the accolades, this season for Michigan has been met with adversity on and off the field. But the players and the coaches and the team never wavered. Michigan has a saying, those who stay will be champions, and champions they have become. These players are champions on and off the field. Team 144 is the epitome of what it means to be Michigan men and stand as champions because of it. We are proud of these young men. We are so proud of Coach Harbaugh and his staff and all of those who are involved with this great program. Congratulations, Michigan. You are national champions. Go Blue!
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my
Without
remarks.
objection, the gentlewoman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize Staff Sergeant Richard Francis Branney, a U.S. Army veteran who served during World War II and was recently awarded the Bronze Star Medal for his gallantry during the Battle of the Bulge. Nearly 80 years ago, Mr. Branney valiantly served in 3 campaigns in the European theater, including on the Western Front, where he distinguished himself as part of the 84th Infantry Division Rail Splitters. From the beaches of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, Mr. Branney and his regiment faced freezing temperatures, fierce enemy fire, and insurmountable odds as they warded off German forces. Amidst trials that tested their resolve, their bravery never wavered. And last month, and at 100 years old, Mr. Branney was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for demonstrating extraordinary heroism during this critical turning point in World War II. His service is a reminder of the sacrifices made by an entire generation, the sacrifices that led to the freedoms we hold dear today. On behalf of a grateful nation, I stand before the United States House of Representatives to thank Staff Sergeant Richard Francis Branney for his devoted service to our extraordinary country. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 947, I call up House Joint Resolution 98, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title V, United States Code, of the rules submitted by the National Labor Relations Board relating to, quote, standard for determining joint employer status, end quote, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
Union Calendar Number 277, House Joint Resolution 98. Joint resolution provided for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title V United States Code of the rules submitted by the National Labor Relations Board relating to standard for determining joint employer status.
Pursuant to House Resolution 947, the joint resolution is considered read. The joint resolution shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce or their respective designees. the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, and the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
And include extraneous material on the resolution under consideration. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House Republicans are coming to the rescue of small business owners once again. The House will soon vote on a bipartisan Congressional Review Act resolution to rescind President Biden's anti-freedom, anti-growth joint employer rule. Business-to-business relationships are fundamental to American commerce. At its most basic level, a joint employer standard should ensure that the entity calling the shots in the workplace is legally liable. That's why it's important to get this right. Under the Trump National Labor Relations Board rule, it was right. The Trump NLRB made sure that clear criteria were met before an employer was deemed legally liable for an individual's employment conditions. Critically, the Trump rule recognized that the ability of businesses to control their destinies is a pillar of the American dream. It established a standard that enticed countless men and women to start and grow small businesses and employ millions of workers. But the Biden NLRB unended this easy-to-understand joint employer standard that promoted economic growth and job creation. Under the new joint employer rule, small business owners are going to be compelled to acquiesce to more big government regulation and union boss control. Here's why. The traditional Trump rule stated that 2 or more businesses were considered joint employers under the National Labor Relations Act if they shared actual, direct, and immediate control over the essential terms and conditions of employment, including hiring, firing, discipline, supervision, and direction of employees. This predictable and clear standard ensured employers would not be saddled with collective bargaining obligations or with liability of a company they do not control. But under the Biden NLRB rule, an employer now includes those who have only indirect or even potential control over employees' essential terms and conditions of employment. And like a rerun of a low-rated TV show, we've seen this story before. While the Trump board restored the common sense traditional joint employer standard, the Biden NLRB's rule largely revives an Obama-era standard. The Obama NLRB upended decades of precedent and broadly expanded the definition of joint employment. That means working families and small businesses are up against a confusing and damaging new rule from Biden's NLRB, which will sow confusion and destabilize the economy in a time when persistently high prices are crushing hardworking Americans. The results from Obama's joint employer rule give us an eerie glimpse of what's to come. Franchise operational costs increased by $33 billion. The decision caused 376,000 lost job opportunities in the franchise sector alone. It increased NLRB unfair labor practice charges by 93%, imposing significant litigation costs on businesses both large and small. Special interests are hard at work attempting to sweep these facts and the failed historical record under the rug. The AFL-CIO purports that the rule will in no way threaten or disrupt franchise arrangements or staffing firms. Big labor set the line, and the Biden administration took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Moreover, this is not the only myth big labor is spreading about the resolution. Let me be clear, this resolution does nothing to restrict union activity. It does not alter the rights afforded to workers under the National Labor Relations Act. What it does is ensure the appropriate parties meet at the bargaining table to resolve labor disputes. While the Biden NLRB's joint employer rule takes the side of the special interest masters, House Republicans have heard the pleas and are taking the side of workers, small businesses, and the American entrepreneurial spirit. Congress must stand with franchisees, small and large business owners, and millions of workers by voting with a bipartisan mandate to rescind the Biden NLRB's joint employer rule. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.J. Res. 98, the Congressional Review Act resolution to repeal the National Labor Relations Board's joint employer rule, which the board finalized last October. Through their unions, workers should be able to negotiate for higher pay, better benefits, and safer workplaces. However, this is not the case for millions of Americans, including janitors, housekeepers, cooks, and many others who are employed through subcontracts or temporary agencies. The rise of what's called, quote, Fisher workplace, where firms increasingly use overlapping arrangements of contracting, subcontracting, and temping, has weakened workers' bargaining power and allowed large corporations to evade bargaining obligations and liabilities. For example, if an employee of a subcontractor were to unionize, a subcontractor could refuse to bargain over pay, hours, workplace safety, or other issues because its contract is because of its contract with the prime contractor, who essentially sets the wages for the employer. Whoever is setting the wages ought to be the one at the bargaining table. If the workplace employer is essentially setting the wages, and you have to sit up and negotiate with the temp agency, they said, that's all we can pay. Talk to somebody else. We need somebody else at the table to be bargaining. Likewise, a temp agency may be restrained on what it can pay because of the contract with the owner of the workplace. Additionally, by evading bargaining obligations, the prime contractor, who's actually setting the wages, can shift liability for an unfair labor practice on the subcontractor or the temp agency. Now, the NLRB rule fixes this problem by ensuring the workers can negotiate with all entities controlling their working conditions. This protects the small businesses from being held liable for labor violations that are a result of the employer's actions. By repealing the NLRB's rule, H.J. Res. 98 would undermine workers' ability to exercise their rights and reinstate the deficient Trump-era rule that narrowed the joint employer standard. Under the Trump-era standard, employers who control the working conditions could easily evade their obligations to collectively bargain with employees. Now, we should not go backwards. The Biden-Harris administration's joint employer rule empowers workers and protects small businesses. My colleagues have just claimed that there's a problem with franchisees and the franchising model. These claims are unfounded. There's no credible evidence showing that the rule would adversely affect the franchise model. In fact, if a problem arises, a strong joint employer standard would protect franchisees by ensuring the franchisors don't control the franchisee's labor relations and then leave the franchisee on the hook for the liabilities. I want to highlight that the American Association of Franchisees and Dealers wrote in support of both the Protecting the Right to Organize Acts, that's the PRO Act, joint employer standard, and the Biden-Harris's proposed joint employer rule that we're talking about today. And it is also important to point out that the NLRB has never found a franchisor to be a joint employer of a franchisee's employees. The joint employer rule reflects the best interests of the American people and our economy. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that we'd be standing with the workers and small business owners and not repeal a rule that protects them. I oppose the resolution and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of H.J. Res. 98, a resolution brought under the Congressional Review Act that will nullify the new joint employer rule finalized by the Biden administration's activist National Labor Relations Board. The joint employer rule is a continuation of anti-employer, anti-worker, pro-union activism spewing out of Biden's NLRB. Originally created as a neutral federal agency to safeguard employee rights, the NLRB has destroyed its reputation under the leadership of radical leftist General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo. If we fail to pass the resolution today and this new rule goes into effect, it will rescind the current direct and immediate control standard and replace it with the Biden administration's indirect reserved control standard. These rules go to the heart of what it means to control your own business. The Biden administration threatens the existence of the franchise model used by so many great businesses across our nation. Years ago, when President Obama's NLRB tried to advance a similar rule, the International Franchise Association conducted a study on its impact, and research showed the Obama standard would have increased operational costs for franchisees collectively by as much as $33 billion annually and led to the loss of 376,000 jobs. Under the rule, something as simple as a franchisor giving a franchisee a company handbook could be interpreted as exercising indirect control, and this opens up a floodgate of questions and unnecessarily creates a problem for the current structure. Today's businesses are fighting to survive the consequences of Bidenomics. They're suffering high inflation, low workforce participation, high interest rates, and more. If you ask any franchisor, the last thing they would say they need is more government bureaucrats telling them how to run their business. We must protect the model that is currently working for businesses and eliminate the threat of this new rule, and I urge my colleagues to vote for H.J. Res. 98, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentlewoman reserves, and now I recognize a gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, who is a senior member of our committee and who is the ranking member of the Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education Subcommittee.
The gentlewoman is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of workers and franchisees and in opposition to this harmful resolution. The bill we're debating today would reverse a rule of the National Labor Relations Board that clarifies who or what is a joint employer. Under this rule, employers can no longer use subcontractors or staffing or temporary agencies to block the opportunity for hardworking Americans to bargain for fair wages or safer workplaces. The Biden administration's joint employer rule will help workers and grow the middle class by restoring the NLRB's ability to consider an employer's control over an employee when determining joint employer status. This is not new. It was the law for decades. Also, I want to push back on the arguments that some of my colleagues continue to make that a strong joint employer rule threatens the franchise model. It does not. As a lawyer who formerly represented franchisees, I know the franchise model and I know how it works. A franchisor does not have an employment relationship with the franchisee's employees, and franchisors do not determine the terms and conditions of their franchisee's employees. It's the franchisee who runs the business and controls the employees. That's freedom. In fact, the rule actually helps franchisees because it discourages franchisors from trying to micromanage the franchisee's employees. In fact, as Ranking Member Scott has made clear, the NLRB has never found a franchisor to be a joint employer. Now, the chair mentioned this increase in expenses Well, it's certainly not expenses of the franchisees. I would expect that a significant amount of that money has been lobbying against this rule and spreading misinformation about how the sky is falling for franchisees when, I repeat, there has never been a franchisor who's been found to be a joint employer. The rule works. Let's stand with workers and defeat this bill, and for these reasons, I oppose HJ Resolution 98, and I encourage all of my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields, the gentleman reserves, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas and Chair of the Small Business Committee, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I rise today in opposition to the National Labor Relations Board joint employer rule that will be disastrous for small businesses across the country, and I also am a franchisee. The NLRB is attempting to adopt an overly broad new definition of the joint employer that will greatly increase the number of entities that are subject to costly new Department of Labor requirements. Last fall, the Committee on Small Business held a hearing to examine the disastrous impact of the regulation as well as many others coming out of the Department of Labor. We heard directly from job creators on how the new joint employer rule will prevent businesses from looking for growth opportunities because of the legal uncertainty caused by this rule. If we continue to punish the businesses that provide over half the workforce and half the payroll, our economy is going to suffer. In a time where inflation remains stubbornly high, businesses cannot find qualified workers to hire, and supply chains remain fragile, we should not be adding another confusing regulation to the list of their troubles. I'm glad to see the CRA come to the floor today so we can provide regulatory relief to businesses already dealing with significant employee economic headwinds. I urge my colleagues to support HJ Res 98. In God we trust. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves, and Mr. Scott from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 4 minutes to a senior member of our committee, the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman from California is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this resolution. The National Labor Relations Board, under President Biden, issued a final rule this past October that restores the board's ability to consider the extent to which an employer controls the terms and conditions of someone's employment. So what does this mean? Well, the Biden NLRB rule prevents employers from skirting accountability for complying with workplace laws. The Trump administration NLRB rule, in their 2020 rule, severely hampered the American workers' ability to hold employers accountable. There's nothing, the characterization by the chairwoman, I reject, that the Trump administration rule was pro-freedom. There's nothing pro-freedom about the Trump administration rule except for the freedom to steal wages, to exact unfair labor practices and other violations. That's a perversion of the word freedom. A trend called fissured work has become commonplace. What does fissured work mean? Fissured work means that when a company adopts a dynamic of contracting and subcontracting, instead of hiring the workers directly, they subcontract it out. And that's how they avoid responsibility for being fair to the workers. A prime example of this is temping. And today, roughly 3.1 million Americans are employed by a temping agency. These temporary work arrangements are characterized by their short duration, and employment can range from just a handful of days to months. So let's say a company needs to hire a front desk receptionist and enlist the help of a staffing agency. For an individual seeking a job opportunity who may not be able to secure full-time, long-term employment, maybe as quickly as he or she would like, a temporary staffing agency may seem very enticing. If hired, the receptionist sent out by the staffing agency would essentially be performing work on behalf of a client company that directs the employee's work but does not receive a check signed by that client company, but rather the staffing agency writes the check. This common practice is one for companies to pay employees for less work than a traditional full-time employee and would receive. And many times these employees have hostile or unsafe workplaces. Now, these fissured work arrangements at temp agencies often result in a lack of clarity regarding employer responsibilities and may become challenging for workers who are interested in organizing a union to negotiate collectively or hold employers accountable for labor standards. For that receptionist who wants to negotiate his or her pay, the conversation with the company proves difficult to have. Who do you negotiate with? The temp agency or the company? Fissured work is unfortunately rampant, and it is critical companies not be able to evade bargaining and responsibility of workers. This is the problem that the Biden NLRB joint employer rule seeks to fix. If a company maintains its right to control how much a worker earns and how many hours they work a week, and whether they can organize, then it also must maintain its responsibility for complying with the laws that protect workers. This is common sense. This rule helps workers and protects small businesses that follow the rules. This rule would upend the dynamic of allowing big companies to shield themselves from labor negotiations. Companies that engage in fissured employee arrangements would no longer be able to evade such responsibilities. All companies should be held accountable, irrespective of how many workers or geographically where employers are stationed. The final rule is expected to take effect February 2024.
Gentleman's time is expired.
I deal additional 30 seconds.
If only my Republican colleagues were equally focused on helping empowering workers, I would wish that my Republican colleagues were more focused on helping and empowering workers. I urge opposition to the joint resolution. I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. I now recognize the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Chair of the Republican Study Committee, Mr. Hearn.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Madam Speaker, because of the successes that I've had in life, not many people know that my life began very differently. My family was dependent on food stamps for most of my youth. My stepdad never worked, and my siblings and I paid the price for it. I knew from a young age that I would not let that be my life. From the moment I could start working, I did whatever it took to earn a financial security. Hog farming, welding, computer programming, the list goes on. If it weren't for the McDonald's franchisee program, I wouldn't be here today. After 11 years of working in the restaurants, I was able to work my way into the franchisee program and purchase my first franchise location and then build a successful company with over 20 locations and thousands of employees. I've lived a truly American story, and my mission in life is to help every child who grew up like me, wondering where their next meal would come from, unsure if the lights would be on when they came home from school. I want those kids to know that our country is a place of opportunity and a place of hope for those who will work for it. Today, we are here to provide congressional disapproval over a rule that would completely destroy the franchise model that gave me the opportunity to be successful. I want to thank Congressman James for his introducing the CRA to shed light on how harmful the National Labor Standards Board rule is to small businesses and especially the franchise model. This new rule would have grave consequences on small businesses and the franchise model. Have we not learned from our history? Under the Obama administration, joint employer rule was expanded, and the data shows that franchises lost $33.3 billion each year, 376,000 jobs were lost, and lawsuits increased by 93%. We have already seen this administration's spending habits wreak havoc on Americans in the form of inflation. We cannot allow the Biden administration to move forward with this rule that will have devastating effects on our economy. We should learn from our mistake that Obama administration made and reject this new joint rule. Madam Speaker, I urge my friends on both sides of the aisle to support H.J. Res. 98. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentlewoman from Virginia reserves, and gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions, gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Gentleman from California is now recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding and say hello to the chairwoman. When workers come together to bargain collectively for better wages, hours, and working conditions, workers, families, and our entire economy succeeds. But they can only negotiate for these things if, in keeping with the principles of the National Labor Relations Act, all parties with power to control their employment are required to be at the table. The Biden administration's joint employer rule makes sure that that's possible, and we should be supporting it, not trying to undo it. If someone is hired by a subcontractor and that subcontractor has no ability to change the pay and hours of its employees because they're predetermined by the prime contractor, it might understandably refuse to bargain over those issues. Without the prime contractor at the table, these workers are denied their right to negotiate over these fundamental parts of their jobs. The Trump-era joint employer rule allowed companies to control the workplace like an employer, but dodge the legal responsibilities for one. The Biden administration's updated rule will set the law back on track, ensuring that a company controls a worker's essential terms and conditions of employment, they are accountable to answering to those workers directly. As a former union member and the current ranking Democrat in the House Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions Subcommittee of the Education and Labor Committee and a member of the Labor Caucus, I've seen firsthand that labor unions can be key to improving working conditions, pay, and a worker's voice. When workers succeed, America succeeds. I'm also a former small business owner, and I appreciate that as part of its due diligence when putting this updated rule together, the NLRB did an analysis and concluded that it would not have an undue economic impact on small businesses. I encourage my colleagues to vote against this resolution, which would harm workers by overturning the Biden administration's joint employer rule, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields, and the gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan and the prime sponsor of the resolution, Mr. James.
The gentleman from Michigan is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of my resolution, H.J. Res. 98, to provide for congressional disapproval of the NLRB's recent joint employer rule. I want to first thank the esteemed member from North Carolina, Chairwoman Foxx, and her staff for working with me and my staff to get this bill to the floor and hopefully to the Senate. I've been here about a year, and it's readily apparent to me that too many people in this town are making rules that they will never live by in an area where they've never had to survive in the business world. And too many of my colleagues seem to be convinced that small business is the enemy and big government is here to save them. Plainly put, this joint employer rule is part of the Biden administration's anti-freedom, anti-growth, and anti-business agenda that is gutting the American dream. Madam Speaker, the American people don't want Washington telling them how to start or manage a business in this country. Don't take it from me. Franchise owners in my district have conveyed to me that they are choosing retirement over dealing with this harmful policy. They want the chance to create a better life for their families and their employees' families and not be controlled by out-of-control bureaucrats at the NLRB. We already have the right to collectively bargain in this country, but this rule goes too far. This is the most glaring evidence yet that capitalism and choice are threats to this administration's socialist America Last agenda. When this regulation was enacted under the Obama administration, it cost franchise businesses $33.3 billion per year. According to the International Franchise Association, around 26% of businesses are owned by people of color, compared with 17% of independent businesses generally. Madam Speaker, I fear this harmful rule will lead to job losses, increase of cost of living for Americans already suffering, few American dreams being realized as well. You know, it burns me up when I hear politicians talk about creating jobs. Politicians can't create jobs, but they sure can kill them. That is what this regulation does. Bureaucrats don't create jobs, businesses create jobs. But Republicans aim to make policy that will not only result in more jobs, but more job creators. These job creators, these entrepreneurs, these franchisees, these independent contractors create good paying jobs and give people opportunity to succeed. And overturning this joint employer rule is just the first step in the right direction. I'm the walking result of the American dream. My father started our family business with one truck, one trailer, and no excuses, and worked 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, with my mother by his side. When he handed that business down, my brother and I, with a wonderful team and the grace of God, were helped to grow it to higher heights. We put more effort into it, and that is the story of how this nation grows and is more successful. But we can't allow this story to end. So, Madam Speaker, I implore my colleagues to remember that small business on Main Street in their districts as they cast their vote today, because the small business on Main Street will certainly remember them in November. For these reasons and more, I urge a yes vote on H.J. Res. 98, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Michigan yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. And gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle.
The gentlewoman is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent for, I ask unanimous consent to address the House.
The gentlewoman is now recognized.
Today I rise in strong opposition to H.J. Resolution 98, which would repeal the National Labor Relations Board Joint Employment Standard. Under President Biden, this rule was issued to protect workers' rights. Unfortunately, House Republicans want to repeal this strong standard, and today I've heard a lot of misleading claims about this joint employer standard. Simply put, this issue is about whether or not employers have to come to the bargaining table where the employer controls the means and manner of the worker's employment. As a member of the Congressional Labor Caucus and someone who spent 25 years in the private sector putting food on the table for my family, I believe that when workers come to bargain over their wages and working conditions, those employers who do control the means and manner of workers' employment, and that is the standard by which we determine whether someone is a direct employee or an independent contractor, should be at the bargaining table as required by law. And when workers do better, employers do better, and our country does better. And this is exactly what the Biden administration's joint employer rule does. What it doesn't do is impact the ability to utilize independent contractors when appropriate. And has been mentioned today, no franchisee has ever been categorized as a joint employer. There's more misinformation used to undermine the ability of workers to organize and bargain for better wages, hours, and working conditions. This strong standard overturns the Trump administration's rule, and it cracks down on corporations that outsource jobs and use independent contractors to walk away from their duties as an employer, creating an unlevel playing field and unfair competition for those employers who are willing to provide fair wages, hours, and safe working conditions for their workers as per the letter of the law. In seeking to overturn the NLRB's new, stronger joint employer standard, House Republicans are working to help bad employers avoid their responsibility to employees and undermining workers across this country. I urge my colleagues to vote against this anti-worker bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Oregon yields. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. And the gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of this joint resolution, which would overturn a completely nonsensical ruling by the National Labor Relations Board. The NLRB is seeking to expand the definition of an employer to include what they call joint employers. That is, an employer that exerts indirect control or even potential control over an employee. Madam Speaker, it's been said that those who do not honor the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. And we are about to make the same mistake that we made almost 10 years ago when the NLRB took this exact same action. And what happened? It raised costs for small businesses by over $33 billion and resulted in the loss of nearly 400,000 jobs. Madam Speaker, that will happen again if this ruling is allowed to stand. And it is completely appropriate that Congress is taking this action under the Congressional Review Act because this is a decision that has major consequences for employers across our country, and yet has been made by a set of unelected bureaucrats. Madam Speaker, under our Constitution, the power to regulate interstate commerce resides here in this chamber and this building, not with an unelected executive branch agency. Madam Speaker, this common sense resolution would overturn that ruling, returning that power not only to Congress but for small businesses across our country, and I urge its adoption. I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentlewoman from Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could you advise how much time is available on both sides?
The gentleman has 15 and a half minutes. And the gentlewoman from North Carolina has 14 and a half minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Sorensen.
Gentleman from Illinois is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.J. Res. 98. Last year, the administration took an important step to protect workers' rights by issuing an updated joint employer rule. Unfortunately, House Republicans are now trying to reverse the strong standard. My colleagues across the aisle are making misleading claims today about the joint employer standard, arguing incorrectly about the impact on small business franchises. Now, let me be clear. The joint employer issue is simply about whether or not an employer is obligated to come to the bargaining table. I've heard from so many working families across central and northwestern Illinois who feel that they're left behind, like the government does not stand for them as they work paycheck to paycheck, trying to do the right thing for themselves and their families. All the while, big corporations automate jobs, misclassify workers, all to save a quick buck while reporting record profits and forgetting whose labor got them to the positions of success in the first place. As a member of the Congressional Labor Caucus, I believe that when workers come together to bargain for their wages, for good benefits, for safe workplaces, then every entity that has control over these conditions should be at the table, and it's required by law. And that's exactly what the Biden administration's joint employer does. The strong standard overturns the previous administration's rule, which allowed corporations to easily outsource jobs so that they could evade responsibility and undermine organized labor. We cannot allow House Republicans to undermine workers in this country by overturning the National Labor Relations Board's joint employer standard. To the hardworking people in my district, let me be clear. As your member in Congress, I will always stand on the side of workers and fight for your protection.
The gentleman's time has expired.
And I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill.
The gentleman from Illinois yields. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne.
The gentlewoman from Texas is now recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of this joint resolution to rescind this detrimental, job-killing regulation from the Biden administration. This final rule revives the Obama-era joint employer standard, leaving companies liable for employees that they don't oversee or directly manage. As co-chair of the Franchise Caucus and chair of the Committee on Small Business Oversight Subcommittee, I have heard from countless franchise small businesses about this rule. Overwhelmingly, they would suffer drastically. They would lose out on income, opportunity, and autonomy over their business, and the cost is not small. A very similar 2015 standard cost the franchising sector over $33 billion per year. It resulted in nearly 400,000 lost job opportunities, and it practically doubled litigation against franchises. My home state of Texas continues to lead the nation in job growth and is the fastest growing state for franchise establishments. This misguided policy would hurt these job creators who want nothing more than to provide for their families and offer job opportunities to our communities. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution to push back on the Biden administration's vast overreach and give our small businesses the chance to survive and to thrive. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Texas now yields. Gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Kazar.
The gentleman from Texas is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to this Republican proposal because across our country and across my home state of Texas, working families are struggling to make ends meet while big corporations boast record-breaking profits. And so we should all be celebrating this Biden-era NLRB rule to make sure that those same big companies have to bargain for better wages and better benefits with their workers, and that those big companies can't throw contractors in the way in order to evade that baseline responsibility. But unsurprisingly, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are running to the rescue of those same big corporations and their record-breaking profits. The Republican majority wants to help those corporations be able to deny workers the benefits and the higher wages and the overtime and the health care they deserve. And what's most ironic that I've heard today from the Republicans that are for this bill is they keep saying they want to defend small businesses. But in fact, the Republican proposal today is to allow big corporations to throw a small contractor in between themselves and their employees so that they can keep on underpaying their staff and providing fewer benefits than those workers deserve. I'll give you an example from my district. In my district, my constituents run YouTube Music, which is used by millions of people across the world. YouTube Music, of course, is owned by YouTube and by Google, but they don't get a check from Google. They get a check from a contractor that otherwise wouldn't exist, except for the fact that they are there to essentially pass the check along to workers, but shield Google and YouTube from their responsibilities to their workers. That's why these folks that are helping make Google $60 billion in profits just last year make as little as $19 an hour. And this Republican proposal is to shield enormous corporations like Google from their responsibility to make sure that the workers that create their profits actually get to share in American prosperity. Workers have the right to bargain for fair wages and working conditions with every company that controls their terms and conditions of employment, and that's why we should defend this Biden-era NLRB rule to protect workers' right to bargain. Workers across the United States are saying yes to higher wages, are saying yes to better health care, are saying yes to collective bargaining, and it's time for Congress to catch up. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
The gentleman from Michigan is now recognized.
I thank the gentlelady. Madam Speaker, I strongly support H.J. Res. 98 to overturn the Biden administration's joint employer rule, which would directly harm employees across this nation. Employees who can become and do become entrepreneurs, franchise owners, and small business people because of their opportunity. This misguided joint employer rule is a classic case of solving a problem that doesn't exist, and in the process creates unnecessary barriers to success. Madam Speaker, we have been here before. In 2015, the Obama LNRB implemented the Browning-Ferris decision. I remember it well, which rewrote the joint employment standard with disastrous results. To say otherwise denies the truth. It raised franchise operational costs by $33 billion, caused 376 job losses. It increased NLRB unfair labor practice charges by 93%, imposing significant litigation costs on businesses both large and small. But despite the historical evidence that expanding the definition of joint employment harms economic growth and job creation, the Biden NLRB has decided to finalize a substantially similar rule anyway. Michigan is home to over 23,000 franchise locations, employing approximately 248,000 people. However, as a result of this new regulatory burden, workers and small businesses in Michigan and across the country are at risk of losing jobs and opportunities to pursue their own American dream. I urge my colleagues to pass H.J. Res. 98 so it can return to a common sense standard that workers and local employers have relied on for decades and promote success. I yield back.
The gentleman from Michigan yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. And the gentleman from Virginia is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 3 letters in opposition to H.J. Res. 98. The first is signed by the AFL-CIO, SEIU, and the Teamsters. The second is signed by the Steelworkers. And the third is signed by a diverse group of organizations, including the National Organization for Women, National Partnership for Women and Families, and the Leadership Conference of Civil and Human Rights, and many more.
Without objection.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
The gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for yielding the time. I rise in support of H.J. Res. 98, which would nullify the Biden administration's expanded joint employer standard, impacting franchises and small business across the nation. In October, President Biden's radical National Labor Relations Board appointees circumvented Congress to reimpose a broad joint employer standard that threatens the flexibility of business owners, upends the franchise model as we know it, and negatively impacts the U.S. economy and workers. We know and appreciate our local franchises and want to make sure they have the flexibility to operate efficiently and inspire future entrepreneurs. However, in a report released by the International Franchise Association, 2/3 of franchises expected the new standard to raise barriers to entry into franchising. As a small businessman, I know that in today's evolving economy, certainly in the workplace, is a key ingredient to success for employers, job creators, and small businesses nationwide. But unfortunately, the federal government tends to get in the way, muddying the waters and blurring the lines in already difficult economic conditions. Having started a small business, I know all too well how additional hurdles and barriers to entrepreneurship can stifle innovation. In fact, what we have in this administration is a war on small businesses. At a time when workers and families are struggling to keep up with inflationary reality of Bidenomics, it is appalling that this administration is now saddling entrepreneurs with further roadblocks. Republicans will continue to promote policies that foster the entrepreneurial spirit and the small business community. I urge support of H.J. Res. 98, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields, and gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is now recognized.
I thank the distinguished gentleman. I want to answer the question, can't we all get along? There is no doubt of Democrats' promotion and support of small businesses. They're in my district. We work every day to make sure they have access to credit, that they are able to pay their workers, and to benefit from programs like the PPP during COVID. I don't know how many small businesses stopped me to say we were a lifeline, Democrats who passed the American Rescue Act and many other ways of helping. Today we rise to oppose what is not bringing people together, it's dividing people. H.J. Res. 98 is another extreme attack on workers, and it undercuts the NLRB's ability to address workplace conditions in a fair and equitable manner. As we know, on October 27, 2023, the NLRB published a final rule addressing the standard for determining joint employer status. It is important to highlight the following facts in support of this rule. The rule is not to be against businesses, small businesses, or to be against workers. It is, in fact, to be able to ensure good quality of work. Employees need to be able to collectively bargain with both joint employers to ensure the parties calling the shots are at the table. This requirement is particularly important for employees of subcontractors and staffing agencies, such as janitors, housekeepers, cooks, and many others. They work on behalf of a company that directs their work but does not sign their paycheck. But I can assure you, this can be a win-win situation. A good quality of life for our employees, great income for our small businesses, and a reasonable response to people's hard work. I rise to oppose H.J. Res. 98 because I want to stand for small businesses and for the workers, and that's what Democrats do. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman for Virginia reserves. Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter in the record a letter from the National Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship, U.S. Black Chambers, and U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce supporting H.J. Res. 98. This letter raises concerns about the NLRB joint employer rules' impact on all small businesses, contractors, and franchisees around the country. Particularly, the letter notes that the rule could, quote, impact minority-owned small businesses and franchisees that rely on these contracts to sustain and grow their businesses. The letter continues, quote, the franchise model has been a driver for minority entrepreneurship and job creation by allowing budding entrepreneurs to partner with well-known brands and bolster local ownership of Main Street businesses around the country. It has also been particularly successful on ramping first and second generation immigrants into business ownerships, end of quote. I urge my colleagues to consider these views, vote yes on H.Res. 98, overturn the Biden NLRB joint employer rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I advise the gentlelady from North Carolina that I'm prepared to close.
I'm prepared to close also, Mr. Speaker, but I believe I have the right to close.
Does the gentleman yield?
Thank you. I yield myself the balance of the time. Just very briefly, Mr. Speaker, the joint employment rule would only weaken the critical protections for workers that congressional Democrats and President Biden has fought so hard to enact. This rule only requires that those who can control the conditions of work actually be at the bargaining table when the conditions of work are being negotiated. Without this kind of rule, employees would be stuck trying to negotiate wages with a temp agency that has no control over the wages. We've heard a lot about the franchisee situation. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a comment letter from the American Association of Franchisees and Dealers that points out that franchisors should be at the bargaining table if they are in fact controlling the conditions as this rule provides and as the resolution would overturn. So instead of advancing H.J. Res. 98, the House should prioritize legislation such as H.R. 20, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, that strengthens workers' abilities to organize and collectively bargain. This resolution goes into the exact opposite direction, and so for those reasons I oppose the resolution and encourage all members to do the same. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter in the record a letter from a coalition of more than 70 organizations led by the International Franchise Association supporting H.J. Res. 98. The letter argues that the NLRB's joint employer rule is, quote, misguided and will harm millions of workers and small businesses across the country, end quote. The letter also states the final rule will, quote, will cripple small businesses in numerous sectors by exposing them to frivolous litigation, eliminating jobs, and slowing wage growth across the country, just like it did when a similar standard was implemented in 2015. The letter continues, at a time of continued economic certainty, it is alarming that the NLRB has chosen to move forward on such a divisive and damaging joint employer rule. Mr. Speaker, it's clear to me in listening to this debate this morning from speaker after speaker on the other side that they have no experience in the private sector and no idea of how our economy works. Our country has flourished economically because of freedom and the entrepreneurial spirit that exists in this country. They constantly want to squelch both of those principles. I'd like to point out a key difference in the Republican and Democrat parties illustrated by the joint employer rule. Listen carefully to the language under debate. The conservative language, direct, immediate. The liberal language, indirect, potential. Any casual observer of American politics can understand how the blatant attempt to smuggle legal ambiguity into the otherwise clear-cut law will be abused by a weaponized and partisan agency. It will open every American franchisor and franchisee to lawfare from the left if it does not toe the Democrat Party line. With the spurious pretenses we've seen this administration use to go after Catholic Americans and concerned mothers, we don't need to give it another tool to go after American small businesses. Therefore, I urge the passage of the resolution and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from North Carolina yields. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 947, the previous question is ordered on the joint resolution. Question is on the engrossment and third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title V United States Code of the rules submitted by the National Labor Relations Board relating to standard for determining joint employer status.
Question is on the passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The joint resolution is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Mr. Speaker, on that, I request a recorded vote.
Does the gentlelady request the yeas and nays?
I request the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. The motion to suspend the rules, pass H.R. 839, and passage of the Joint Resolution 98. First electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is on the vote of the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, to suspend the rules and pass H. 839 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are now ordered. The clerk will report the title.
Union Calendar Number 235, H.R. 839, a bill to require the United States Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund to advocate for increased transparency with respect to exchange rates policies of the People's Republic of China and for other purposes.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic vote. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 379, the nays are 1. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is voted passage of House Joint Resolution 98, in which the yeas and nays are ordered. Clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
Union Calendar number 277, House Joint Resolution 98. Joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the National Labor Relations Board relating to standard for determining joint employer status.
Question is on the joint resolution. On passage of the joint resolution, members record their vote by electronic device. 5-minute vote. members voted? Any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 206, the nays are 177. The joint resolution is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. All right. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business question on suspension of the rules, passing of H.R. 540 as amended. The clerk will report the title.
Union Calendar Number 237, H.R. 540, a bill to require the Secretary of the Treasury to pursue more equitable treatment of Taiwan at the international financial institutions and for other purposes.
The question is, will House suspend rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion is laid upon the table. Rule 20, unfinished business, passed. Question suspended rule passing H.R. 803 as amended. Clerk, report the title.
Union Calendar Number 230, H.R. 803, a bill to direct certain financial regulators to exclude representatives of the People's Republic of China from certain banking organizations upon notice of certain threats or danger and for other purposes.
Question is, will House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business question upon suspending rules and passing H.R. 4768 as amended, which clerk report the title.
Union Calendar Number 266, H.R. 4768, a bill to require the Secretary of the Treasury to instruct the United States executive directors at the international financial institutions to advocate for investment in projects that decrease reliance on Russia for agricultural commodities.
Question is, will House suspend the rule and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is on the question of suspending the rules, passing H.R. 6370 as amended, which will clerk will report the title.
H.R. 6370, a bill to require the Office of Foreign Assets Control to develop a program under which private sector firms may receive a license to conduct nominal financial transactions in furtherance of the firm's investigations and for other purposes.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion chair, 2/3 being the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns to meet at noon on Tuesday, next for morning hour debate, and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purposes did the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks. And, Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
We bring the House. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. Will suspend. The House will be in order. Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania kicked off one of my favorite events, the Pennsylvania Farm Show. For more than a century, farmers have gathered each January at the Pennsylvania Farm Show in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. This weekend event is the largest indoor agricultural exposition in the nation, showcasing more than 6,000 animals, nearly 12,000 exhibits, and more than 500,000 visitors. Each year, I host a listening session at the Farm Show, and we cover a range of topics during the public forum. This year, I held my listening session on January 6th, the same day the Farm Show kicked off. I was joined by my fellow Pennsylvania Congressman Dan Muser and Pennsylvania Agriculture Secretary Russell Redding. Thank you both for being there as we heard directly from Pennsylvania's farmers and producers. I've been hosting this listening session as representing for Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District for 14 years. Like every year, I look forward to hearing directly from the backbone of our nation, the hardworking men and women of American agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to question the Republican commitment to the American people. They prefer to waste taxpayer dollars attacking hardworking, patriotic American civil servants and fail to address the issues facing our country. In 7 days, government funding will run out. Republicans should be working with Democrats to continue funding vital programs to help working Americans. They should be discussing how to protect Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, how to support our allies of Ukraine and Israel, and how to help the Palestinian families caught in the crossfire of the deadly conflict in Gaza, and how to provide the cleanest air and water possible for the American people. Instead, they're too busy pandering for social media clicks with political stunts and continue to do absolutely nothing to help the American people. I hope they know the voters are watching and they will remember their inaction in November. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Wyoming seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the body for 1 minute and extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Ryan Pasborg, a truly remarkable Wyomingite whose exceptional character and heroic actions left a profound impression on both the community and the state of Wyoming. The morning of February 2nd, 2022 began like any other for Ryan as he went about his daily commute to work. During his drive, he began to smell smoke, witnessed flames, and noticed 3 young children escaping from a burning home. Ryan immediately stopped and, after speaking with the children, learned that their mom and younger brother were still inside the house. Without hesitation and at great risk to himself, Ryan rushed into the burning home and managed to rescue both their younger brother and mother, for whom he later administered CPR, all while on the phone with 911. No lives were lost that day due to Ryan's selfless actions and unparalleled courage. Upon being nominated, he was later rightfully awarded the Carnegie Medal, North America's highest civilian honor for heroism. While Ryan's extraordinary actions that day will be remembered for generations, the courage, compassion, and integrity he exhibited are simply a part of who he is each and every day. I urge all my colleagues to join me in recognizing Mr. Ryan Pasborg for his valor and commitment to the safety of his fellow Wyomingites. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on this day to celebrate the extraordinary life of my dear brother and friend, Dr. John Lewis Flateau, who was laid to rest this past Wednesday. Dr. Flateau, a beloved scholar and public servant, dedicated his life to championing justice, equality in public service, and political empowerment. His contributions spanned politics, education, advocacy, leaving an indelible mark on Brooklyn, New York City, and New York State. His legacy extends beyond the policies he championed. It lives on in the lives of the many he touched. He was not merely a legislative force, he was a force to be reckoned with. He was a friend and a confidant and a political mentor to so many, including both me and my mother, the Honorable Dr. Una Clark. He had a profound impact on the lives of so many, from his tenure as Medgar Evers College professor to his work in advancing voting rights. As well, as we reflect on Dr. Flateau's life, let us remember the countless stories of those who found hope and empowerment through his advocacy. In his absence, we must continue to carry the torch that he lit to ensure that his vision continues to manifest itself. And though Dr. Flateau may no longer be physically with us, the impact he made will echo on from generation to come. He is now with the ancestors, and he will be dearly and deeply missed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How many more innocent lives need to be lost before Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden realize that securing our border is more than an immigration issue? It's a fundamental duty we owe to the American people. Since President Biden took office, over 7 million encounters have taken place on our southern border, and that number continues to climb with an unsettling rate, with roughly 10,000 additional crossings each day. The United States offers more legal immigration than anywhere in the world. The individuals entering illegally are not all coming with hopes of living out the American dream. They are helping China bring more than 26,000 pounds of fentanyl across the border. They are trafficking an all-time high number of vulnerable women and children. There are known terrorists on the FBI watch list and more. And U.S. taxpayers are the ones footing the bill to cover emergency care, housing, shelter, and more for these illegal immigrants. It's imperative the President and Senate pass the Secure the Border Act to fortify the safety of our country and protect our citizens. I yield back.
And now, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of the Central Avenue Farmers Market. The Central Avenue Farmers Market in Los Angeles is run by Sustainable Economic Enterprises of Los Angeles, SELA, which has been a driving force in advancing regional food sustainability in California's 37th district. SELA works hard to promote regional and local food vendors that offer a variety of fresh fruits, vegetables, juices, eggs, and an assortment of prepared foods. Back in August, I was fortunate to visit the Central Avenue Farmers Market after a tour of a local WIC facility. I loved walking through the market and speaking to vendors as they discussed the importance of fresh produce and local business. The market is open to everyone, accepts CalFresh EBT, and has helped expand access to fresh produce for families on WIC and SNAP. While House Republicans continue to push for devastating cuts to programs like these, SELA has been a lifeline for so many families in need. I hope you will join me in celebrating the 20 years of SELA's Central Avenue Farmers Market. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise or extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I represent many of the people who made the steel that built this country, who still make the steel this country relies on. And we are seeing today, unfortunately, corporate executives, egged on by Wall Street, selling off U.S. Steel to a foreign company. A company, U.S. Steel, that's benefited from strong action in this country. Tariffs from President Biden and President Trump, the Inflation Reduction Act, defense spending, the infrastructure bill, and more. Chasing the biggest, fattest bid, blowing off the steel workers whose work made them rich. Profit matters, don't get me wrong, but other things matter too. Workers, our jobs, our communities, this country. We need an economy that reflects that, that says that hard works matter, not just greed. Let's keep fighting for all of that. I yield back.
As a reminder, the House will be in order. Members are reminded to take their conversations off the floor to the side gallery. For what reason does the gentlewoman from Vermont seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Here we are. A new year, a new opportunity to actually do something for our people back home. It's discouraging and frankly embarrassing that this has been the least productive Congress in U.S. history. The chaos and dysfunction in this Congress under Republican leadership has caused legislative paralysis, and it has prevented us from focusing our attention on the critical needs of our constituents. And more than that, the chaos, the fear-mongering, the dehumanizing rhetoric has dragged us closer to a crippling cynicism. We are sent here to act in service of our communities and our constituents. We can't do that when we demonize each other, when we dehumanize each other, when we dehumanize our fellow Americans. We can't do that when we don't treat ourselves with basic human dignity. This isn't some naive notion. It's reality. The nihilism and cynicism is threatening our democracy. It's eroding our communities. It's killing us. Let's get back to being spirited political opponents and move away from being enemies. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the body for 1 minute, extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, my hometown of Louisville is the fastest growing Cuban community in the entire U.S. 14,000 Cubans have arrived in our city in just the last 2 years, enriching our social fabric by building families, contributing to our economy, and adding pasteles and cafecito to our menus in the process. The Cuban Adjustment Act creates a clear pathway to residency for Cuban nationals who immigrate to the United States. But court rulings threaten the ability of Cubans recently issued an I-220A form to remain in the U.S. This is wrong. It robs Cubans of the rights guaranteed them by the Cuban Adjustment Act. And no one should have to live in this legal limbo, including the thousands of individuals who live in my district. Today, I'm sending a letter to DHS Secretary Mayorkas urging him to correct this situation by granting parole-in-place status to any Cuban issued an I-220A. I know he is committed to ensuring no one is wrongly or arbitrarily removed from our country, and I will continue to work with him and my colleagues here until this is fixed. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I introduced the EpiPen Act to cap the cost of any 2-pack epinephrine auto-injector to $60 for 2-pack for folks who with private health insurance. A few years ago, I had a life-threatening allergic reaction and had to use an expired EpiPen that I hadn't replaced due to the sky-high cost. And if it wasn't for the EMTs, I would have died that night. They can cost more than $650 even after insurance. And no, I'm not alone. I've heard from an American who can't afford to purchase enough EpiPens, so that way her kid can have one in all the places they need it, their backpack, the school nurse, daycare, at home, in the car. An American who keeps 4 expired EpiPens in the hopes that it'll have enough active medication to save his life one day. And an American who hasn't filled a prescription in the past decade despite having severe allergies, and also she works in the medical field. Folks, it's plain and simple. It doesn't have to be this way. We need Congress to step in, look out for working families, and cap these prices for life-saving medications. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
It is with a heavy heart that I rise today to honor the life and legacy of Bunker Hill basketball coach Jim Lafka, who passed away last month at 90 years old. The love and respect Coach Lafka had for his players and the game was truly immeasurable. Under his leadership from 1959 to 2002, Bunker Hill teams had a record of 754 to 347. During that time, he not only coached the Minutemen to 6 regional championship wins, but he also made lifelong impressions on countless young people. Coach was known for his brilliant coaching and humility. He was always proud to talk about his players' accomplishments more than his own. Jim Lafka's unwavering dedication to the game of basketball and his leadership will never be forgotten throughout the Bunker Hill community. May his leadership, passion, and wisdom live on for generations of athletes to come. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the incredible students and faculty from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for their stellar first-place ranking in the 2023 National Cyber League competition. The National Cyber League is a cybersecurity skills competition that reinforces learning, encourages collaboration, and develops students' necessary skills for future careers within the cybersecurity field. The students at RPI, coached by Dr. Brian Callahan, placed first in the nation out of a pool of more than 8,500 students and more than 500 colleges and universities around our great country. Their achievement is truly remarkable, and I offer my hearty congratulations to these students and my thanks to the dedicated coaches and professors whose support and encouragement enabled this terrific success. So congratulations, Team RPI. Once again, I appreciate the great work you've done, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to rise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the strikes on the Houthi rebels inside Yemen. Last night, the U.S. and coalition partners conducted strikes against numerous targets in Yemen used by Houthi rebels to endanger U.S. and international shipping vessels. For months, Iranian-backed fighters have attempted to disrupt global commerce and wreak havoc in the Red Sea. These unprovoked attacks not only risk the lives of our service members and innocent civilians, they threaten to disrupt the international economy. When the circumstances demand it, we must rise to the occasion and act. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I will always support swift action to defend our national security interests. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
With sadness, but yet with the joy of her life, I rise today to salute Carolyn Middleton Hall, who passed away this December 2023. Carolyn Middleton Hall was married to our beloved Anthony Hall, a pilot, a great civic leader, a former member of the Houston City Council, and a champion of opportunity and equality for our community. She's a mother of Anthony and Ursula, 2 successful young people who are also contributing to this community. I rise to salute the late Carolyn Middleton Hall for all that she has done to make Houston a better place for all of us to live. She was a great educator, a lover of improving the lives of young people, and she came from a political family. She spent her life with her father and uncle fighting for workers' rights and making sure that unions were strong in our community. And yes, as her husband ascended to public life, being one of the pioneers. As an African American serving in Houston, Carolyn was right there. You could always say that she was his best advocate for getting the votes. Her smiling face, her willingness for service, her unselfishness, and I believe the fact that her daughter is now serving as a judge. She was right there helping to generate votes, but also friends. You could not help but be a friend to Carolyn Middleton Hall. So today, Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to remember her and be reminded by our moment of silence that we will take as I conclude to be able to honor, yes, an American whose name you may not know at every dinner table, but you should know of her kindness, her love, her belief in America, her championing of the civic system of government and voting and equality. I champion and honor the late Carolyn Middleton Hall. May she rest in peace and may she rest in power. Thank you, my dear sister. A link and an AKA. I yield back.
The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Danny Davis of Illinois for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for as much time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize and celebrate Fort Mose Historic State Park in the beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. Fort Mose, a National Historic Landmark, is the site of the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in the United States. In the 1600s, enslaved people in the British Carolinas made their way south to freedom in St. Augustine, which at that time was under Spanish rule. Next week, the park, along with the Florida State Park System Foundation and community partners, will break ground on a full-scale reconstruction of the original fort that once stood there. You can see the updated renderings of the fort here beside me. It's really going to be an amazing site. This project is the realization of decades of dreams, dedication, and hard work from hundreds of individuals who share a love for the Fort Mose history and rich story. Thanks to the partnership of the Florida State Parks Foundation, the Fort Mose Historical Society, and Florida State Parks, the fort will be completed this winter. This winter, it'll be completed and is expected to draw visitors from around the world to Northeast Florida. The reconstructed Fort Mose will have lasting impact for St. Johns County, our state, and our nation for generations to come. So congratulations from Florida's 5th Congressional District again to Fort Mose Historic State Park and to all who have been involved in bringing this amazing story to life. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I see one presenter. If you'll come forward, I'll yield.
Chairman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9, 2023, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 30 minutes.
Holy cow.
You got it, Dave.
Here.
Thank you.
Well, this is our first week back from, I guess referred to as Christmas or winter break, and at least 60 of us Republicans spent a couple days down at the Texas border to analyze one more thing, the complete disaster that we have going on with regard to what I'll refer to as illegal immigration. I want to summarize one more time for the American public and for my colleagues what we find when we go down there. First of all, it is apparent in December of 2023 we will one more time hit an all-time high in the number of people who are let in our country. We are going to clear 300,000. I remind the body that as recently as 3 years ago, that number, the monthly number, may have been 5,000 or 10,000. So we've gone up by a factor of 30 times as many people crossing the border. Sometimes comments out there made by the president imply that it's going to be very, very difficult to find a way to prevent 300,000 people from crossing the border every month. I remind the American public, without Congress doing anything, the prior administration had that number under 10,000. I also want to point out these people are coming from all around the globe. We were down in the Del Rio sector at the Eagle Pass entryway, and now we're just talking here about people who formally check in with the Border Patrol. In the 33 days prior to us coming down there, people came in from 61 different countries. Among the over 300,000 come across in an average month, about 9,000 are unaccompanied minors. Can you imagine in this country? I mean, can you imagine us sending people to another place around the globe, a 12-year-old without either of their parents? This is routine at the southern border. We saw one room where we were told the prior week there were 300 unaccompanied minors, people under 18, in that room at one time. Completely inappropriate, no appropriate oversight. When these people claim that they want sponsors in the country that are related to them somehow, an aunt, an uncle, whatever, we don't do DNA tests. We have no idea, and it probably in some cases is human trafficking. The United States, instead of sending them back to their country of origin and having the courts in Guatemala or Brazil or wherever determine where this child goes, we will deliver them anywhere. The children, the cartels will put a name on a T-shirt and say, deliver this child to 123 Elm Street. And the U.S. government kind of plays like UPS. We just take that child and deliver them wherever they want. We have no idea whether the people who take care of them are good sponsors or bad sponsors. If they claim they're relatives, are they relatives or not? And I would suggest as we debate in the next month what we're going to do with President Biden, our Republican negotiators add, in addition to H.R. 2, a bill which we passed about 2 years ago, add that we will stop taking unaccompanied minors in this country. Okay? As a matter of fact, we should stop taking people without both parents here. Because in America, we should be trying to keep families together. And right now, the Border Patrol, through no fault of their own, is assisting young children here without either parent. As a matter of fact, sometimes they get children so young they cannot yet talk, and then they have to try to track somebody down, or in some cases, just send them to foster care. I hope the American public realizes that by creating the perception around the world that now is the time that anybody can come into the United States as long as they claim asylum, or once they get in the United States, we never try to deport them. We have people dying. And we heard another story when we were in Eagle Pass of a mother and 2 of her children who all drowned in the Rio Grande. Fortunately, our wonderful Border Patrol was able to drag them out and at least save the mom and 1 child, but 1 child did die. This is not unusual when we send the green light, providing you have the Mexican drug cartels helping you across. Not only are people dying in the Rio Grande River, they're dying in the Pacific Ocean as people try to get around a fence that goes, I'm guessing here, about 1/4 of the mile into the Pacific Ocean. I was down there a little while ago in San Diego. They were told that very day they had pulled someone out of the ocean, and we were also told that the Mexican government finds more people drowning in the Pacific Ocean on their side of the fence than our side of the fence. We again heard about people sneaking across between the designated entryways, dehydrating to death in the New Mexico desert, in the Arizona desert. This should never happen. And the American people, generous as they are, they go out in the desert, they put gallons of water, hoping the people who are going to dehydrate to death find the water in time. But nevertheless, the current hodgepodge down there does result in deaths in the Pacific Ocean, deaths in the Rio Grande, and deaths in the Arizona and New Mexico deserts. And I think the people who continue on with the policy or pretend like it's some sort of mystery how we got here are at fault with those deaths. One more time we heard that the primary beneficiary down here is the Mexican drug cartels, that they're the ones who are now making more money sneaking people across the border than they do even selling drugs. I personally heard of somebody telling me in Wisconsin, in my district, somebody from India paying $70,000 to get here. Now, of course, once that person gets here, they're kind of tied down, and in this case, they felt that person, after working 3 years, will have paid off his $70,000. But when it comes from other countries, countries like, say, Guatemala or Nicaragua, the cartels kind of have the family back home as hostages to make sure that the person who came in this country eventually pays their $10,000 or $12,000. The next thing we find out is that I talked to a woman who was in charge of the medical analysis of the people coming across the border, and she got a little bit emotional. All the sexual assaults that are happening, which isn't surprising, because you got to remember, that southern border is run by the Mexican drug cartels. And apparently, they do a good job of making the pitch how wonderful it'll be on the trip, how wonderful it'll be to America. But again, the number of sexual assaults as we push people through the southern border, through the Mexican drug cartels, is something that is on the people that favor this policy and don't get rid of this policy. The next thing pointed out is that people who come across the southern border are not necessarily poor people. They read the advertisements or find about the advertisements on social media, and they come here. But the Border Patrol points out the clothes that people wear, whether they look particularly emaciated or not. They point out that frequently people are coming from other countries and throw away their ID, but maybe you have somebody who's from Cuba. They go to Chile first when they leave Cuba. And then eventually they come to the United States, not because they were starving in Chile. They come to the United States because you make more money in Chile. We are a very wealthy country, and if you work hard, you're able to make money. Or maybe the welfare benefits are more generous in the United States. But in any event, do not fall for the myth that people are coming here because they are emaciated and starving and it's all they can do. They frequently, it is apparent to the Border Patrol, are, by the standards of their home country, be it Brazil, be it Venezuela, be it Cuba, they just can make more money in the United States. I think before the American public believes that that's an appropriate way to come here, the American public ought to stop and realize that with well over 1 billion people in China and India, just to pick two countries, if we have a policy of anybody who can just make more money in the United States can come here, we can find ourselves with tens of millions and eventually hundreds of millions more people here. Because I would guess if you talk to all the people in China and talk to all the people in India, a very high percentage would rather come to America. And as it becomes more and more apparent that we have a president who doesn't care what's going on at the border, more and more people will come here. I also want to point out that by having people come here, you drive down the wages for other people. And we know there are powerful people who lobby us, who tell us that they don't like paying American workers so great a wage. There was a time when the Democrat Party at least pretended to care about the low-wage worker, but there's no question, as we continue to let 300,000 plus people here a month. Ultimately, it will drive down wages and hurt the American workers who are already here. It will also create a situation in which people are selling or sending these wages back to their country of origin. But it also creates a situation, as we have so many people checking in at the points of, at the designated entryways that the Border Patrol provides for people, the Border Patrol will not have the manpower necessary to patrol what's going on between designated entryways. And that's how we get the drugs in this country that are killing over 100,000 Americans a year. I've said before, I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, there were all sorts of articles and comments about the number of American troops who were dying. In 12 years in Vietnam, about 57,000 Americans die. Every year, twice that many die of illegal drugs in the United States. And obviously, one of the first things to do is you ought to cut off the spigot at the southern border, but the Biden administration does not care. And the drugs keep flowing across the border, and our young Americans keep dying, twice as many every year as died 12 years in Vietnam. I'll mention one more time that they get here, or they frequently come here, because of advertisements on social media around the world. These advertisements, of course, make things look good, and I think the United States has to get out there and try to explain, once we enforce our border, that it's not all going to be that good, and they may wind up sitting on the Mexican side of the border, and they might not wind up in the United States at all. But again, I repeat, in that sector alone, which is one of 9 sectors on the southern border, in the prior month, people came here from 61 different countries, including countries, by the way, whose government may not necessarily be favorable to the United States and may wish the United States ill. We haven't had horrible terrorist attacks within the United States, but I think all Americans should remember 9/11 and remember right now that if you are dealing with a country who wants to wish the United States ill, we have a lot of single men coming here from countries all around the world, and countries like, say, Syria, or Iran, or say the Houthis out of Yemen. There has never been an easier time to come into this country and put yourself in a position in which you can kill many Americans, do terrorist attacks, destroy some of the American electrical grid, and that is what's happening. And again, I'll point out, a lot of single men are coming across that border. Ask yourself, why are so many single men coming across the border? So in any event, I beg Republican leadership, and I don't know if there's any hope that President Biden cares anymore, but we used to have under 10,000 people across the southern border a month, and that was before we built any wall, which we should be building. Now is the time to go back to the policies that were in effect 3 years ago, when we had under 10,000 people crossing the border. Some people say, Glenn, why are they doing this? They're doing it because they want to change America. I just gave you statistics on people coming across the southern border. I want to also point out the few people who are being deported. You would think that you wouldn't want everybody to come here, but at least once somebody committed a crime here, at least then you would kick somebody out. Now, I was here under President Trump, and President Trump was perhaps rightfully criticized for not deporting enough people in this country who had broken the law. Believe it or not, under the Biden administration, we're deporting people at 1/4 to 1/5 the rate of the Trump administration, who wasn't deporting enough people. Think about that. You know, President Trump was criticized for not kicking out enough people when they broke the laws, and President Biden is kicking out people at about 20 to 25% of that rate. What conclusion can you draw? That he wants good people in this country, or the appropriate conclusion that he wants anybody under the sun coming into this country. As far as people who feel we're being mean by not letting people in the country, last fall I attended a ceremony in which new people who came here legally became American citizens. We are now, I believe in the next year when the final numbers are released, over 1 million people managed to become American citizens by doing it legally. And there they are appropriately vetted. They have had to stay in America for a while. And if you talk to them, it's truly a joy. And I haven't had anybody talk about serious proposals to reduce that 1 million figure. We are now bringing people in legally at the highest rate since 2006, and I wouldn't be surprised when the new numbers are out if we are bringing new people, or new people are being sworn in at a greater rate than any time in this century. So please, Republican leadership, if anybody has any influence on the Biden administration, do what you can to bring these numbers back under the 10,000 figure, and do what you can to begin deporting people who are in this country who shouldn't be here. Because let's face it, if some of these people who have borrowed $12,000 or $20,000 or $70,000 begin to be deported so that you no longer know whether you're going to be in the United States long enough to pay off the drug cartels, you're going to have a dramatic decrease in the number of people coming here. So thank you. The next issue that has not changed since I was here before is we continue to have the war between Ukraine and Russia. I don't read anything about the Biden administration making any efforts at trying to end that war. That is a war in which both countries should be very concerned about their young people. Both countries have shortages of the population. Ukraine has the second lowest birth rate in the world, trailing only South Korea. Russia has a low birth rate and also suffers from so many of their young people trying to get out of the country. Nevertheless, rather than approach France or Israel or Turkey to try to negotiate some sort of truce there, the administration seems perfectly happy to allow the carnage to go on. Not only is this a humanitarian disaster in its own right, but it creates a situation in which the U.S. Stature in the world continues to decline. Since this war has begun, we have driven Russia and China together. They should both be our friends. Instead, they're both more likely our enemies. Same thing with Iran, as we drive Iran and Russia together. And at least we're told we're supposed to be cautious about Iran. They're trying to make nuclear weapons. But as long as the war goes on, Iran and Russia become closer and closer. The solution clearly is to work to some sort of peace. People will say we can't negotiate with Vladimir Putin. I remember in the 1950s, I don't remember it personally, but you read about in the 1950s, we had the Korean War. And in the Korean War, the head of Red China was Mao Zedong, maybe the greatest mass murderer in history. Did Eisenhower say we have to let this war go on and on and on because we don't have 100% of what we want, or we have to let it go on and on and on because we won't negotiate with the communist Chinese? No. President Eisenhower realized the world would be more stable. We now have a line between North Korea and South Korea. We haven't had a war there in almost 70 years now. But that's when we had a President Eisenhower who realized the world is safer. We don't have these hot wars going on. Now President Biden just sits there. Oh, we can't negotiate with Vladimir Putin. He's a bad person. Oh, Ukraine is not yet prepared to end the war, so we just have to let this thing go on for years. We've had, we guess, over 30,000 dead on each side in countries which have such shortage of young people already. I urge President Biden, or maybe some of the people around him, to think, what can I do to end this war? Wouldn't it be a more stable world if we went back to where we were a couple of years ago and we slowly worked both Ukraine and Russia into the regular group of nations. So we hope that happens. The third issue that has come to our attention yesterday on my subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Oversight Committee, one more time we looked at the effect of offensive progressive policies on the Pentagon. In the military. We currently have the head of the Joint Chiefs, who in what I thought was an inflammatory statement, said he wanted to reduce the number of white officers in the military down to 42%. I think currently it's high 60s or something. So in other words, he wants to overtly have racial background used to decide who gets promoted in the military. First of all, that's opposed to merit. I'll tell you, if our military is ever not number one, we have big problems in the country. But apparently, President Biden's first pick for head of the Joint Chiefs thinks the most important thing is to put people in silos and say, now we have to promote the Native American, now we have to promote the Hispanic American, whatever, and we aren't just going to promote the best people. That by itself is a problem. Secondly, it's divisive. There is a reason why the hard left likes this DEI. They like, the Marxists have not been able to take down America because we have such a strong and prosperous middle class. We love being Americans. Marxists like to believe that they can destroy countries by setting the middle class against the rich and create a conflict or a civil war type situation and destroy that country. They realize now that they can't do it. The American middle class is too strong. Our religious beliefs are so strong. That is not the way you take down America from within. So they're coming to Plan B. And Plan B is we are going to divide Americans by race. And we are going to say that because we've divided by race, we have achieved greater diversity. And with diversity comes a better cooperation, a better college, what have you. It bothers me that the press never calls them out on how this diversity is supposed to make things better. I suppose normally when you think of diversity, you think maybe people had different life experiences. Okay, maybe they had different majors, maybe they had different jobs. Maybe if you're talking about the military, somebody was in the Navy and somebody was in the Air Force, where you had genuine different viewpoints on things. But here they're talking about racial differences. Now, given that for the purposes of this sort of thing, you self-identify. And as we have more intermarriage in the United States, which by itself is a sign of not prejudice, you're going to have some people who might be, say, one half Mexican, one half Cuban, one half Jamaican, one half Korean. And apparently the people in favor of this feels that therefore they are going to bring different gifts or different viewpoints to the table. They should be challenged on that by the media. Okay, if we have two kids who go to Silver Spring High School here, and one is 1/4 Mexican and one is 1/4 Korean, and one is 1/4 Vietnamese, and they all live on the same block, and they all were on the same basketball team, and they all hung around with the same friends and went to the same church. I challenge the advocates for this diversity stuff to tell me how these kids are going to have such a different view of the world, and especially how, say, a job, Navy fighter pilot, Army Corps of Engineers, how are they going to add something different because of where their grandmother was born? A grandmother maybe they never met, maybe they never spoke Vietnamese, they never spoke Spanish, maybe they never even saw these countries. But we now have an ideology here in which people are supposed to bring something to the table because their grandmother or grandfather came from such and such a country. It's ridiculous on its face. Nevertheless, we have to put up with this praising of diversity as somehow bringing something to the table if we hire, and it's not just the military, of course, it's big business, big education, whatever, but the people should be challenged on that. The only reason you could possibly say it results in diversity is if you really are a racist and believe genetically you have different gifts or talents because you are 1/4 Cuban or 1/4 Nigerian or what have you. So it's something that we ought to criticize. It's something we ought to get rid of. By the way, one of the things we learned in the committee is that right now the military will pay people up to $190,000 a year to be experts on diversity. Do we want more diversity experts in this country? And the cost is bad, but just as bad as the cost, these people, to justify their existence, are going to run around and try to inflame people and set people one against the other. On our American seal, it says e pluribus unum, out of many one. And we're supposed to take people from all around the globe, come here, and now view themselves as equals and together with each other. Not surprising, the Marxist people who like DEI in the military and other places, they view it the opposite. They want to take people who are happily well-adjusted Americans and say, you should be unhappy. You should not view yourself as an American. You should view yourself as a Cuban American. You should view yourself as a Burmese American. And America is prejudiced against you, and you should walk around with a chip on your shoulder. And you should ask for something because your ancestors came from Burma. You should ask for something because your ancestors came from Brazil. Clearly the Marxists want to do this because this is a way to destroy America, to set people against each other, to say every promotion, every hiring, every government contract is a contest between groups. And in every election, we should vote for the party that does the most to look out for our group. So I beg the President to rescind his drive towards DEI bureaucrats running the Pentagon. I wish we would do something about the current head of Joint Chiefs, who has just brazenly said he's going to discriminate against white people when it comes to promotions, and get back to the wonderful America that we had 20 or 30 years ago. And I hope, because examples of this DEI occur not only in the military, but other governmental agencies in the world, that as our negotiators negotiate the budget for the calendar year October 30th, all of these DEI bureaucrats are kicked out of the American government, and we get back to where we are Americans first and foremost, and back to a time when merit determines who is promoted. So those are three issues I hope the press would pick up on. And I want to see whether I should adjourn here. I would like to move, I move that we now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Tuesday next for morning hour debate.